They had watched Earth for 300 years before they decided the humans were ready. Their observation stations, hidden behind the dark side of the planet's single moon, had recorded everything. They watched humans split the atom. They watched them reach their own moon with rockets that burned chemical fuel like primitive torches. They watched them build thinking machines and connect their entire world with invisible signals. It was all very standard, they agreed. Every young species followed the same path. First fire, then metal, then electricity, then the atom, then the thinking machines. The Galactic Consortium had seen it happen thousands of times across millions of years. They had charts and graphs and formulas that predicted exactly how long each stage would take. The Universal Innovation Index had never been wrong. When the crystalline ships finally descended through Earth's atmosphere on a clear morning in September, they chose Geneva as their landing site. The city was neutral ground, a place where humans gathered to talk instead of fight. Ambassador Oran had studied human customs carefully. She knew they would be afraid at first, then curious, then eager. It was always the same with young species. The first meetings went exactly as predicted. Human leaders gathered in large rooms and asked nervous questions. They wanted to know if they came in peace. They wanted to know why they had been chosen for contact. They wanted to know what the stars held for them. Oran answered patiently. Yes, peace was their only intention. The consortium had contacted them because they had reached the appropriate level of development. The stars held wonders beyond imagination, but humans would need centuries of careful learning before they could claim their place among them. The humans nodded and smiled and signed documents promising cooperation. They were very polite, very agreeable, very much like every other young species the consortium had uplifted. The trouble began 3 days later. It started with Dr., a physicist from a human university in a place called California. She had been assigned to the cultural exchange team, one of dozens of scientists selected to learn about technology at a pace the consortium considered safe and appropriate. They had given her access to a decommissioned navigation console, an older model that they no longer used. It was meant to be a teaching tool, something for humans to study for the next decade or so as they slowly grasped the basic principles. Did not take a decade, she did not even take a month. On the morning of the third day, Oran received an urgent communication from the human facility. Something had happened with the navigation console, something the observers did not understand. When Oran arrived, she found sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a dozen other humans. They had the console open, its crystalline components spread out around them like the organs of some dissected creature. Several humans were taking photographs with their small handheld devices. Others were scribbling notes on paper with primitive writing tools. Ambassador said, looking up with bright eyes, "I have some questions about the power routing in this unit." Oran stared at the disassembled console. According to the Innovation Index, humans should not even understand what power routing meant for another 15 years. Opening the console itself should have been impossible without tools that had not yet been invented on Earth. "How did you access the internal components?" Oran asked carefully. "Oh, that was," said, gesturing to a young human with messy hair and an eager expression. "He figured out that your crystalline matrices respond to specific harmonic frequencies. We just needed to find the right pitch. Took about 4 hours." The young human, named, smiled and waved. He could not have been more than 25 years old by human counting. The scientist who had designed that locking mechanism had spent 60 years perfecting it. Oran felt something cold settle in her chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation. They did not often experience surprise, and they almost never experienced fear. They were one of the elder races, part of the consortium's founding species. They had helped write the Universal Innovation Index. They had watched young species rise and fall for longer than human civilization had existed. "What questions did you have?" Oran asked, keeping her voice neutral. held up a small crystalline component, handling it with a confidence that should have taken years to develop. This quantum routing matrix, it uses a base 12 computational framework, which makes sense given your mathematics, but the translation overhead when processing non-native calculations seems inefficient. Have you ever tested base 2 alternatives? The question was so unexpected that Oran did not immediately respond. Base 12 computation was fundamental to technology. It had been developed over thousands of years. No one had ever questioned it because there had never been a reason to question it. It worked. Base 2 would be incompatible with our existing systems, Oran finally said. For your existing systems, sure, chimed in. But if you were building from scratch, Base 2 would reduce processing overhead by about 19%, maybe more. We'd need to run some tests. Oran looked at the young human, at his casual confidence, at the way he spoke about technology, as if it were a puzzle to be solved rather than a gift to be accepted with gratitude. She thought about the innovation index, about its careful predictions, about the centuries of teaching and guidance that were supposed to follow first contact. She excused herself and returned to her ship to file a report. The Universal Innovation Index processed her data and returned an error code that had not been generated in 11,000 years. The system had no framework for what was happening. Humans were not supposed to understand crystalline matrices for another 40 years. They were not supposed to question fundamental computational architecture for another century. They were not supposed to be improving technology at all. Over the following weeks, the situation only got worse. Human engineers descended on every piece of technology like hungry animals finding food after a long winter. They photographed everything. They measured everything. They asked endless questions, and when the answers did not satisfy them, they found their own answers through experimentation. A team in Japan figured out how to replicate the atmospheric processors using materials available on Earth. The original design had taken the consortium 200 years to perfect. The humans did it in 3 weeks, and their version was smaller. A medical research group in Germany received permission to study a sample of healing, strictly for observation purposes only. Within a month, they had figured out how to reprogram the to target human diseases that they had never encountered. Their modified version was faster and more precise. A graduate student in Brazil, working with nothing but publicly available data and a computer he had built himself, cracked the mathematical principles behind faster-than-light communication. He posted his findings on something called the Internet, where any human could read them. Oran watched all of this with growing unease. She sent daily reports to the consortium, each one more alarmed than the last. The innovation index was recalibrated 7 times in the first month. Each new calibration predicted that humans would slow down, that they would reach the limits of their comprehension, that they would finally begin the long process of patient learning that every other species had followed. Each prediction was wrong. Requested another meeting with the ambassador near the end of the 2nd month. She came alone this time, without her team of eager scientists. She sat across from Oran in the ambassador's private quarters and folded her hands on the table. "You're scared of us," said. "It was not a question." Oran considered lying. The diplomatic protocols suggested reassurance, gentle redirection, careful management of the young species' perception. But something about its direct gaze made deception feel pointless. "Concerned," Oran admitted. "Your species is progressing faster than any in recorded history." Nodded slowly. "Can I tell you something about humans, ambassador, something that might help you understand?" Oran gestured for her to continue. "We've never had time," said simply. "Ice ages that nearly killed us, plagues that wiped out half our population, wars that threatened everything we built, climate collapse that almost ended our civilization before we could leave our planet. Every single generation of humans has faced extinction. We never got the chance to learn slowly. We learned fast or we died." She leaned forward, and something in her eyes was both fierce and sad. "You gave us technology and expected us to take centuries to understand it. But we don't have centuries. We've never had centuries. All we've ever had is right now, and the absolute certainty that if we don't figure things out immediately, we won't survive to try again tomorrow." Oran sat in silence for a long moment after left. She thought about this long and peaceful history, about the thousands of years of careful development, about the stable and predictable path that every consortium species had followed. Then she thought about humans, about their desperate hunger for knowledge, about their refusal to accept limitations, about the way they looked at impossible things and immediately began trying to make them possible. For the first time in her very long life, Oran understood fear. 6 months after first contact, the Galactic Consortium convened an emergency session for the first time in 4,000 years. Representatives from 412 spacefaring species gathered in the Great Hall on Prime, their various forms filling the tiered seats that rose toward a crystalline dome showing the cold light of distant stars. High Analyst 4 stood at the center of the chamber, her bioluminescent tendrils flickering rapidly as she prepared to deliver her report. The delegation shifted uncomfortably in their atmospheric pods. The crystalline collective hummed at frequencies that suggested deep anxiety. Even the ancient, who had seen more galactic history than any other species, seemed troubled. "The agenda today contains only one item," 4 announced, her translated voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "The human problem." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The human problem. In 6 months, those two words had gone from a minor note in first contact reports to the most discussed topic in galactic politics. "As you know," 4 continued, "Earth's governments have been cooperative since contact. They have signed every treaty we presented. They have agreed to every restriction we imposed. They have attended every educational program we offered." She paused, and her tendrils curled inward, a gesture of distress. "They have also completely ignored the spirit of every agreement while technically honoring the letter." The crystalline displays around the chamber flickered to life, showing data that made several species express sounds of alarm. Charts and graphs and timelines appeared, all of them marked with the same impossible trajectory. Human technological advancement was proceeding at a rate the Universal Innovation Index could not predict or contain. The atmospheric processors were shared with humanity for study purposes only, 4 said. The agreed timeline for human replication was 200 years. They achieved functional replication in 3 weeks. Their version is smaller and uses fewer resources. Another display showed the medical. These were strictly for observation. Humans were not expected to understand their programming for at least 50 years. They them within a month. Their modifications target diseases we had never considered. The representative, a massive serpentine creature whose scales reflected light in unsettling patterns, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "This is troubling, but young species often show initial bursts of progress. They invariably slow as they reach the limits of their comprehension." 4's tendrils flickered in what might have been the equivalent of a bitter laugh. "The Universal Innovation Index has been recalibrated 17 times in 6 months. Each predicted exactly what you describe, that humans would reach a plateau, that their progress would slow, that they would finally begin the gradual learning process every species follows." She paused. "Each prediction has failed within an average of 3 weeks." The chamber fell silent. The Innovation Index was the foundation of galactic civilization. It predicted how quickly species would develop, when they would be ready for new technologies, how to manage their integration into the consortium. It had guided the peaceful development of thousands of worlds. It had never been wrong. "They are not innovating in the way we understand the term," 4 continued. "They are iterating. Every piece of technology we share, they immediately begin modifying. They are not trying to understand it completely before using it. They are using it while trying to understand it, and they are using each failure as information for their next attempt. The representative from the crystalline collective, a geometric entity that communicated through patterns of light, flashed a question. This is inefficient. Surely their failure rate causes significant setbacks. Their failure rate is extraordinary, Four agreed. Approximately 70% of their experiments fail, but they do not treat failure as we do. They do not stop and reassess. They simply try again, immediately, with modified parameters. A single human research team can attempt more iterations in 1 month than a team would complete in a century. Ambassador Iran rose to speak. The chamber fell silent with respect, though we're among the oldest consortium species, and their perspective carried weight. I have spent 6 months observing humans directly, Iran said. What High Analyst 4 describes is accurate, but it does not capture the full picture. We have been approaching humans as we would any young species, as students who should be grateful for our guidance. This was a fundamental error. She activated a display that showed a timeline of human history compressed into a few minutes of images. Ice ages, plagues, wars, famines, disasters of every kind, one after another, stretching back to the earliest days of human existence. Humans evolved under conditions of constant crisis, Iran explained. Their entire species history is one of near-extinction events followed by desperate adaptation. They have never had the luxury of slow, careful progress. They developed what they call good enough technology, implementations that work adequately now rather than perfectly later. The representative made a sound of distaste, reckless, dangerous. Yes, Iran agreed, and effective. While we spent centuries perfecting our atmospheric processors, humans would have built 10 imperfect versions, learned from each failure, and arrived at a functional solution in a fraction of the time. They would not have achieved our level of elegance, but they would have survived. A younger consortium representative from a species called the spoke up. What about restrictions? We have the authority to limit their access to technology. We could slow their progress through administrative means. Four's tendrils flickered darkly. We tried. The consortium imposed standard technology access protocols 4 months ago. Humans were only supposed to receive information through official channels, at rates determined by the Innovation Index. She paused. It took them 6 days to discover we were withholding information. It took them 2 weeks to establish back channels with sympathetic consortium species. It took them 1 month to begin reverse engineering the restricted technologies anyway. They circumvented consortium security. The representative sounded shocked. Not exactly, Four said. They did not break any rules. They simply found interpretations of the rules that allowed them to do what we had tried to prevent. Their lawyers, their diplomats, their scientists all work together in ways we did not anticipate. They treat rules not as boundaries but as obstacles to be navigated. The chamber erupted in agitated discussion. The consortium had maintained order among hundreds of species for thousands of years. Their rules were not suggestions. Their protocols were not starting points for negotiation. The idea that a species barely 6 months out of first contact could simply find ways around them was deeply unsettling. The representative finally brought the chamber to order with a rumbling growl. What do you recommend, High Analyst? What action should the consortium take? Four was quiet for a long moment. Her tendrils moved in complex patterns that suggested deep thought. I have one more piece of information to share, she finally said. 3 days ago, our deep space observation networks detected an anomaly, a new energy signature in the Sol system, hidden beneath a mountain range on Earth's surface. The display changed to show a facility buried deep underground. Heat signatures, power readings, structural analyses that showed something large and complex taking shape in the darkness. The humans have not merely been reverse engineering our technology, Four said. her voice carrying a weight that made the chamber fall utterly silent. "They have been building a ship." The chamber erupted again, but this time with something closer to panic. The consortium had given humans access to basic propulsion theory, atmospheric navigation, simple orbital mechanics. Nothing more. Certainly nothing that should allow them to construct an interstellar vessel. "How is this possible?" someone demanded. "They combined technologies," Four answered. "Crystal matrices for power systems, for hull construction, theoretical frameworks they derived from our communication networks. They took pieces from every species they encountered and welded them together into something new." "That cannot work," the crystalline collective flashed. "Different species technologies are not compatible. The fundamental principles are too divergent." "You are correct," Four agreed. "It should not work. Human physics should not allow them to bridge the gaps between our various technological approaches. And yet," she gestured at the display, "the energy signatures are unmistakable. They are building a faster-than-light vessel, and according to our analysts, it will be functional within the year." The representative's voice was cold when it spoke. "Recommendations, now." Four looked around the chamber, at all these ancient and powerful species, at the representatives of civilizations that had endured for longer than human history. She thought about the innovation index, about its predictions, about the comfortable certainty it had always provided. "We have two choices," she said. "We can attempt to contain humanity, quarantine their world, restrict their development, hope that we can maintain the quarantine until they learn to progress at acceptable rates." She paused. "This approach has never been used in consortium history, and our models suggest it would require significant military resources, resources we would need to maintain indefinitely." The alternative hung in the air, unspoken but understood. "Or," Four continued, "we can adapt. We can acknowledge that humanity represents something new, something our models did not account for. We can rewrite the innovation index to accommodate species like them, and we can find a way to integrate them into the consortium despite their unusual development path." "They will destabilize everything," the representative protested. "If other young species see humans advancing so quickly, they will demand the same treatment." "Perhaps," Four acknowledged. "Or perhaps they will provide something the consortium has lacked for." Her tendrils curled thoughtfully. "We are very old, most of us, very stable, very comfortable. When was the last time any consortium species developed a truly new technology, not refined an existing approach, but created something entirely unprecedented?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "The humans are not like us," Four concluded. "They think in ways we do not understand. They take risks we would never consider. They fail more often than they succeed, but they succeed in ways we cannot predict. Perhaps what the consortium needs is not another well-behaved student species." She looked around the chamber one last time. "Perhaps what we need is a species that asks questions we forgot to ask, that challenges assumptions we no longer question, that looks at our ancient certainties and asks, simply, why not?" The debate would continue for hours, but Four already knew how it would end. The consortium was old and wise and careful, but it was also practical. They could see the data as clearly as she could. The humans were coming to the stars, one way or another. The only question was whether the consortium would adapt to meet them, or be swept aside by a species that had never learned to accept the word impossible. The Prometheus launched on a cool morning in March, 18 months after they had first descended through Earth's clouds. It rose from the Swiss Alps on a column of light that should not have existed, using principles that no single species had ever combined, built by creatures who had only learned about faster-than-light travel a year and a half ago. It was not a beautiful ship by galactic standards, the built vessels of flowing crystal that sang with harmonic frequencies, the crafted organic ships that seemed almost alive. The crystalline collective traveled in perfect geometric forms that reflected light in patterns pleasing to their unique senses. The Prometheus looked like someone had taken pieces of every species' technology and welded them together with desperate determination and inadequate tools. Its hull was rough where it had been forced to adapt to human specifications. Its crystal matrices flickered slightly out of phase because humans had modified them to run on base-2 computation. Its engine assembly was a compromise between 6 different propulsion theories, none of which should have worked together. And yet it flew. Ambassador Oran watched from orbit as the human vessel broke free of its planet's gravity well. She had been given permission to observe, to report, to document this moment for the consortium's records. They had wanted to intercept the ship, to demonstrate that humanity's defiance would not be tolerated. Cooler heads had prevailed. Barely. "Their vessel is faster than ours," reported her ship's navigator, a young who had not yet learned to hide his emotions. "Significantly faster. My instruments are having difficulty tracking it." Oran said nothing. She had expected this. The humans had not merely consortium technology, they had improved it. Of course their ship was faster. Of course it was more efficient. Of course it exceeded every prediction. She thought about her last conversation with, the one they had not included in official reports. The human scientist had come to say goodbye before the launch, and she had brought a gift, a small crystalline component, clearly of design, but modified in ways that Oran did not understand. "It is a power regulator," had explained, "for your personal communication device. We noticed it was running about 3% less efficiently than optimal. This modification should help." A gift from a species that had been studying technology for less than 2 years, correcting an inefficiency that engineers had not noticed in centuries. Oran had accepted the gift and asked the question that had been bothering her since their first meeting. "Why do you not hate us?" Had looked confused. "Why would we hate you? We treated your species like children. We condescended to you. We tried to restrict your development. We discussed quarantining your entire world." The human had laughed, a sound that Oran still found unsettling. "Ambassador, do you know how many times humans have been condescended to, restricted, threatened? It is part of our history. Parents do it to children. Teachers do it to students. Nations do it to other nations." She shrugged. "We are used to being underestimated. We have learned to see it as an advantage." An advantage. When people expect nothing from you, they do not watch you closely. They do not guard their secrets. They assume you cannot understand what you see. Eyes had glinted with something that might have been humor. "The consortium shared technology with us because you thought we would take centuries to understand it. You explained concepts because you thought we would need decades to grasp them. You gave us access because you were confident we could not use what we learned." Oran remembered feeling cold again. "You were learning from us the entire time." "We were learning from everyone," corrected gently. "The consortium has 400 species, each with thousands of years of technological development. You gave us access to all of it, thinking we would progress at the rate your index predicted. Instead, we took the best ideas from every species and combined them." She paused. "We are very good at stealing fire, Ambassador. It is what humans do." The Prometheus had passed beyond easy tracking now, accelerating toward the outer system at speeds that made Oran's navigator increasingly agitated. Other consortium ships were moving to intercept, but they were already too slow. The human vessel was not just faster than ships. It was faster than anything the consortium had ever built. The communication request came 3 hours later, broadcast on frequencies that should have taken humans another 50 years to discover. The Great Hall on Prime convened once again, and once again, the agenda contained only one item. Doctor appeared on the central display, standing on the bridge of the Prometheus with a calm expression. Behind her, human engineers moved efficiently at stations that combined technology from a dozen species. Through the viewports, stars streaked past in patterns that indicated faster-than-light travel. "Representatives of the Galactic Consortium," said. her voice clear despite the impossible distances involved. Humanity requests formal membership in your organization, full membership with all rights and responsibilities. The chamber erupted. Several species expressed outrage. Others demanded conditions, restrictions, centuries of probationary status. The suggested military action was still possible, still advisable, still the only way to maintain order. Waited patiently until the noise subsided. "We understand your concerns," she continued. "We have developed faster than your models predicted. We have ignored protocols you considered sacred. We have challenged assumptions you thought were fundamental truths." She paused. "We have also built a ship faster than anything in your fleet using technology you thought we could not understand. We are currently traveling at speeds your physics said were impossible, using a drive we assembled in 18 months from principles you spent developing." The chamber was silent now, listening. "You can fight us," said. "You have more ships, more resources, more experience. You would probably win eventually, but it would cost you. And while you were fighting us, you would not be learning from us. You would not be asking the questions we could help you ask. You would not be building the things we could help you build." She stepped forward, and her image grew larger in the display. "The consortium has been stable for a very long time. Your technologies have been refined for. Your systems work perfectly, exactly as designed, exactly as they have always worked." Her voice softened. "But when was the last time you truly innovated? When was the last time you built something new instead of perfecting something old? When was the last time you looked at your own achievements and asked simply, why not make this better?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because there was no good answer. "Humanity offers you something the consortium has not had in thousands of years," concluded. "Fresh eyes, new questions, the willingness to fail repeatedly in pursuit of something unprecedented. You have given us the gift of your knowledge, whether you intended to or not. Let us give you the gift of our perspective in return." The debate lasted for days. Factions formed and reformed. Ancient alliances strained under the weight of unprecedented questions. Some species wanted to accept humanity immediately, excited by the possibilities. Others wanted to reject them entirely, frightened by the implications. Most fell somewhere in between, uncertain and uncomfortable with a future they could not predict. In the end, the vote passed by a narrow margin. Humanity would be granted full consortium membership, effective immediately. The Universal Innovation Index would be rebuilt from the ground up, with new parameters accounting for what the analysts had begun calling crisis state cognition. And in what many considered the most significant change in consortium history, humanity would be given a seat on the Technology Ethics Council. The irony was not lost on anyone. The species that had broken every technological prediction was now being asked to help decide which innovations were too dangerous to share. Accepted the position with the same calm practicality she had shown throughout. At her first council meeting, a representative asked what qualifications she had to make decisions about technology ethics, given that her species had only been in the consortium for a year and a half. She smiled that peculiar human smile and answered simply, "We have a lot of experience with doing dangerous things. We have learned, through painful trial and error, which risks are worth taking and which are too costly. Your species perfected your technologies over because you had to perfect them. We never had that luxury. We had to learn fast which shortcuts would kill us and which would save us. The considered this, and you believe this experience qualifies you to advise us." "I believe," said, "that a species that has faced extinction repeatedly and survived might have useful insights about the consequences of unchecked development. You have never had to clean up after a truly catastrophic failure. We have had to do it many times. We know what it costs. We know what it teaches." The meeting continued, and slowly, reluctantly, the consortium began to adapt. The Innovation Index was rewritten with new variables. Technological exchange programs were redesigned with human input. Ancient assumptions were questioned for the first time in It was not a comfortable process. Many species resented the changes. Many doubted the wisdom of adapting ancient systems to accommodate a single anomalous species. Many believed that humanity would eventually stabilize, would eventually learn to progress at sensible rates, would eventually become like every other consortium member. Those who watched most closely suspected otherwise. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting for survival against impossible odds. They had learned to look at obstacles and see opportunities. They had developed an instinct for finding ways around barriers, through problems, past limitations that others accepted as fundamental. When interviewed after the Prometheus reached its first destination, a young star system that the consortium had deemed too dangerous for exploration, was asked what humanity intended to do with its newfound status among the stars. She smiled that smile that still made the older species uncomfortable and answered simply, "The same thing we have always done. Look at the impossible and ask why not." Somewhere in the depths of galactic bureaucracy, the newly rebuilt Universal Innovation Index processed her words and quietly added a new notation to humanity's file. Prediction accuracy, uncertain. Recommend continuous observation. Exercise caution. It was, everyone agreed, the most accurate prediction the index had ever made.